Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are getting into the really complicated and, frankly, disturbing history of one of the biggest car companies on the planet. A brand that's been on a wild journey from the darkest parts of the 20th century all the way to global domination.
So, let's just jump right in. It is a truly wild story. You've got genius engineering, unimaginable atrocities, this unbelievable comeback that was fueled by the counterculture, and then a shocking return to deception. I mean, how can one single brand hold so many contradictions?
So where does this all start? Well, you have to go back to 1933, to Adolf Hitler. He'd just become Germany's chancellor, and he had this vision for an affordable car for the German people, a literal Volkswagen, which he saw as part of his grand plan to get the nation's economy back on its feet.
But this wasn't just going to be any old car. I mean, listen to this list of demands he had. It had to carry a whole family, be fast, and be incredibly cheap. We're talking the price of a small motorcycle, plus be super fuel efficient for his new Autobahn. Basically, every German automaker at the time looked at that list and said, nope, impossible.
So, who could possibly pull this off? Well, that's where Ferdinand Porsche comes in. Porsche was an absolute genius who'd been trying to build a simple, cheap car for years, but he could never get the funding. Hitler was impressed, but there was a catch. Porsche was Czech, and in the eyes of the Nazis, that made him subhuman. So, what did Porsche do? He gave up his nationality, became a German citizen, and took the contract.
Now here's where things get, let's say, shady. The final design for the Beetle was amazing, but it wasn't exactly original. You look at it next to cars like the Standard Superior, or especially the Czech Tatra V570, and the resemblance is just uncanny. Tatra actually threatened to sue. Hitler told Porsche he'd, quote, take matters into his own hands. And, well, soon after that, Germany invaded Czechoslovakia and shut Tatra's factory down. Problem solved, I guess.
Okay, so to get this massive factory built and an entire city to go with it, the Nazis created this really clever or maybe sinister savings plan. German citizens could pay just 5 Reichmarks a week to save up for their very own car. And it worked. 336,000 people paid in, raising this absolutely enormous sum, 280 million Reichmarks.
But here's the kick in the teeth. Not a single one of those people who paid into that scheme ever got a car. They never got their money back, either. The whole thing was a complete sham, because that factory, it was never really for them.
Because, from the very beginning, the whole people's car thing was a lie. It was always meant to be a war factory. In fact, one of Hitler's secret design requirements was that the car's hood had to be strong enough to have a machine gun mounted on it.
So the Second World War II kicks off. Any pretense of making cars for the people just vanishes. The factory starts cranking out military vehicles, like the Kubelwagen. And who was building them? Well, over 80% of the workforce was forced labor. We're talking prisoners of war, civilians dragged from their homes in occupied countries, and Jewish prisoners from concentration camps.
I mean, these workers were treated as less than human. They were objects. They were starved, they lived in filth, and they were literally worked to death. It gets even worse. The factory set up what they called a nursery, where hundreds of babies born to the female workers were just left to die from neglect. It's just horrifying.
By the time the war was over, that Volkswagen factory had produced more than 66,000 military vehicles for the Nazi war machine. The people's car had delivered nothing but war. A total, brutal betrayal of that original promise.
So after the war, the factory is just a pile of rubble. It falls under the control of the British Army, and a 28-year-old officer, Major Ivan Hurst, is put in charge of basically tearing it down. But Hurst was also an engineer, and when he found a prototype Beetle in the wreckage, he saw something there. He saw potential.
But here's the thing. Nobody else did. Seriously, nobody. Hearst tried to give the factory to British car companies, but they basically laughed at him, calling the car ugly and poorly made. So he tried the French, then the Americans. All of them said, no thanks. And then came the ultimate rejection from the biggest name in the car business. The British were so desperate to get rid of the factory, they offered the entire company to Ford for free. After checking it out, Henry Ford II's right-hand man famously told him, Mr. Ford, what we're being offered here ain't worth a damn.
So, with literally no other options, Hurst just decided to do it himself, basically. He managed to get a huge order for 20,000 cars from the British Army, which kept the factory from closing. Eventually, they handed control back to a German director, Heinrich Nordhoff, who came up with a really simple but brilliant plan. Just focus on making one car, the Beetle, and make it perfect.
Okay, so the company is back on its feet in Germany.
Now it's time to tackle the biggest market in the world, America. And it was a complete disaster at first. Americans saw this small, ugly car, and it was just a painful reminder of the Nazis. In their very first year, 1949, they sold a grand total of two cars.
Then, in 1959, everything changed. And it changed because of an ad campaign. See, at the time, American car ads were all about selling this fantasy of big, flashy cars and a life of luxury. Volkswagen did the exact opposite. Their Think Small ads were brutally honest, they made fun of themselves, and they were actually funny. They leaned into the car's weird looks and just hammered home what it was good at, being reliable and cheap to run.
And you know what? It worked. Like, it worked insanely well. Sales just exploded. All of a sudden, this cheap, dependable, no-frills car became the perfect symbol for the growing anti-consumerism counterculture movement of the 1960s. Young people who were tired of their parents' big, flashy cars just fell in love with it.
The car just blew up into a cultural icon. It starred in the massive Disney hit Herbie the Love Bug. And then, in 1972, Hitler's car, the one that wasn't worth a damn, officially became the best-selling car of all time, selling more than the Ford Model T. Just an unbelievable turnaround.
But, nothing lasts forever. By the 1970s, the Beetle was starting to look pretty old and outdated, especially next to all these new, more modern cars coming from Japan. So Volkswagen had to innovate, and they did, finding huge success with new cars like the Golf. And then, decades later, it's almost like history started to repeat itself. While they were desperately trying to win back American customers, the company that had built its entire modern reputation on being honest and reliable was caught in a massive scandal. It was an act of deception that felt eerily similar to the lies from its very beginning.
They had been marketing this amazing new clean diesel technology. It was supposed to be the best of both worlds, great gas mileage and low emissions. But it was a complete lie. The cars had illegal software, a defeat device, that knew when it was being tested and would change the engine's performance to cheat the test. In the real world, these clean cars were pumping out pollution at up to 40 times the legal limit.
The fallout from this was just catastrophic. It completely shattered the company's image of honesty that they had spent decades building. And it cost them a staggering $30 billion in fines, recalls, and settlements around the world.
So you go from a dictator's dream built on lies and slave labor to a beloved icon of peace and love, and then back again to a brand of corporate deceit. The story of Volkswagen is one of incredible reinvention, for sure. But it's also a story that seems to just run in a cycle. And it really forces us to ask a tough question. Can a brand, or even a nation, ever truly escape its past